banana associated with monkeys. How much is a banana these days? Used to be 10 or 15p each. These days it's what, 15 to 50p for a banana? And that just depends on what shop you go into, or what quantity of them you buy. Total nonsense. It's getting to evening time. There was loads of bird song and it's all just finished. Let's think about birds for a minute. The birds and the bees that Jesus was talking about in a story. The birds make their homes up in the trees, yeah? They build their nests in the trees. They fly here and there all over the place. And people who've studied politics could possibly say that the way birds deal with their politics is anarchic. They're kind of a pecking order among birds that they sort out among themselves or whatever. But there's no such thing as homeless birds. There's plenty of places for birds to build nests without interfering with other birds. There's no few birds who set up a system in which loads of birds have to live stacked on top of each other. There's no planning permission involved. There's no army of birds who go around enforcing the governmental law of birds and the housing laws of birds. Simple as that. There's no such thing as a homeless bird. Now, how crazy the system that we live in is. Imagine as if my missus used to be worried about this idea that somebody'd hear me say this idea and it'd end up getting taken on and somebody'd do it. The government would do this idea. But imagine if the government decide, okay, we're going to employ some people to go around and tag every single bird with a letter and some numbers. And give an address for every branch and every branch of every tree where there's a bird living in a nest or a family living in a nest. So you've got a name and an address for every bird. And then imagine the government declares a law that it can open a bank account attached to a social insurance number, SIN, SIN, and then that they can extend credit to each of those accounts that are attached to a sin conceived of in the mind of man. Nothing to do with nature whatsoever. So the government decides that it can put €1,000 or £800 or 1,600 American dollars or whatever the currency in any of the countries. We'll talk about here then. The government decides that it can give £800 worth of credit to every nest that nests in a tree anywhere in the land of Britain, or any of its colonies that cover 1/6 of the planet, to this very day. So the government passes legislation, and the very few people who stand something to gain out of this deal all consents at the meeting that they have. Consensus is agreed, a social license is granted, the bank accounts are opened. Credit, which costs nothing, is put into these accounts for each of these birds. Then phase 2 of the plan. Birds are to be charged rent for having a nest. Because they eat worms and because they are alive, there's a cost of living associated with birds. So this new legislation is brought in £800 is credited to the account opened for the name and address of every nest and every tree in the land in all the colonies. And then rent or charge or tax is demanded upon the person associated with every name and address and nest. And at first they just charge a nominal fee, £1 a year. So I don't know how many birds there are that have been counted by these government agents employed to give a name and address to every bird nest. But let's say there's 500 million birds in Britain that have nests. That's £500 million goes into the Treasury. And the Treasury can account for that and spend it, so-called, without having to borrow off the central government, central bank, the World Bank, the Bank of International Settlements Bank, whichever bank it is, that's the conglomerate of all banks, is whoever it is that loans money out to banks. So when the government's borrowed money off that entity, whatever it's called, the government borrowed money off that entity to bail out the high street banks. But that entity owns all the banks. So that entity came up with a plan by which to sabotage the market in such a way as it would seem that the banks had run out of money, that there's not enough money in circulation, because that is the fact. And in revealing that fact to all the people, the bank in charge of all the banks demanded the same deal of the governments of all the countries. You accept austerity in exchange for you borrow money off me to give to my subsidiaries, because I'm telling you my subsidiaries are going to collapse if you don't. You've got to bail out the banks. It's yet again maritime law terminology. To bail out a boat because a boat is sinking. To bail out the banks because the bank is insolvent. It has no liquidity. There's not enough current going through the steam engine of the bank to keep it travelling across the ocean. So piracy that owns all the banks because it set up all the banks. The Phoenicians, perhaps, according to stories, set up a system of market traders in all countries that could deal with any king. That's what we now call the markets, with the stock prices and the shareholders. That's what we now call the corporations, global corporations who run a global economic order. So let's get back to the birds and the nests in the trees. First year you're taking in £500 million. And the second year realised, right, this idea definitely works, let's charge them 10 times as much. Let's charge them all £10 each per year. That's 5 billion. That's a lot of money to spend. The next year, okay, how much money have they still got? They've still got £800 minus 11. Okay. Well, great, let's charge them £500 this year. We'll charge them £500 out of what they have left. 389, I think it is. And extend them more credit because next year we're going to charge them £1,000. So let's give them £2,000 more credit each, and let's start charging them £500 a year. And the following year we'll charge them £1,000 a year. So that's basically called inflation. And that's basically called increasing taxes. And that's all basically abuse of illusionary power. And that's done through a collusion between Parliament, the forked tongue mind of white man, between Parliament and pirates. Man, I was asked the other night in a pub, you'd know about the Irish famine. What's the inside story on that then? And the simple idea of that is an example of the piracy of what the bird analogy is. Back in Ireland, back in the 1850s, the potato crop failed. There was no famine. All the other crops grew perfectly well as they had been for hundreds of years. But an imported root vegetable thing, part of the deadly nightshade family, this non-native South American root that had only been in the country for a short amount of time, a few generations, it failed because of miserable weather that wasn't very suited to that kind of a root. But all the other root vegetables, all the turnips and all the wheat, all the corn and all the whatever else gets grown in the country back in the time, all the pigs, all the swine, all the fish, all the beef, all the venison, everything else that was still growing in the country was not affected by the potato blight, and there was no famine. But in the 1850s, what there was a British Empire, and that British Empire covered 1/3 of the world, or 2/3 of the world, or some large part of the world, and it had a control system of collusion between the pirates and the Parliament and the police force that it employed over its vast empire. The empire upon which the sun never sets, they call it. Now that vast empire needed feeding. It was an empire based upon maritime rule. Rule Britannia, Britannia rules the waves. Rule Britannia, Britannia waves the rules. One law for me, because I have divine right, and another law for all of you, because I'm a parasite who's going to steal all your food off you in order to keep me fat. That's civilization in a pyramid scheme. And they're invaders who came from the east over the space of thousands of years. And they've set up a foreign rule here, which is not native to these lands and not native to the people of these lands. And the people of these lands who still don't accept this way of ruling, who don't police themselves in this oh so polite way, they fall through the system and they end up on the streets. So during the Irish famine, as history likes to call it, it was business as usual. All the food in Ireland was shipped out of the country feed the sailors, and to feed the markets. In the 1850s is the same time as Native American Indians and native Aboriginal people in Australia were being shot down with these new guns that these white men had. One-third of the population of Ireland apparently starved because they were not allowed to eat the food which they grew with their own hands out of their own soil that they'd been living in for countless generations. That's the story of the Irish famine, and that's the story of fracking. Britain doesn't produce its own food to sustain itself anymore. The markets have mixed up all the food all over the place. In this highly evolved civilization of the British Empire, the pirates are not coming here to steal our food off us this time. They've come to steal the last of the food underground. The last of the oil, the last of the gas, the last of the coal, the last of the precious minerals, the last of the gold that can be found, the last of anything that they can possibly find that they can call a resource on this planet. Those pirates are stealing. Now, if you tried to get in the way of the guys with the guns when they were taking the food from your piece of land, they shot you. And they shot your whole family too, as an example to the families around to not try and refuse the food. That's how all the food was taken out of the country, and that's how 1/3 of the population died.
Excuse me?
Yes.
Sorry, hi. My father, he will come soon and I pick boys to bed.
Yeah.
So if you can come.
Do now?
Yeah?
I do it now. Oh, pins and needles in my feet though. Well, if you get in the way of the pirates these days anywhere on the planet, there are people with guns who will make sure that you don't stop them on your own. And there's a mind control of believing in money in general that'll stop everybody from joining with you. And that's kind of what I see being played out in Barton Moss. So I've got to go get my daughter anyway. Thanks for listening. Bye.